How does narcissistic codependent relationships affect our mental and emotional health? Thank you guys and gals so much for your subscription. And for those of you who are visiting the Luminousz channel for the first time, welcome. And if you have recently become a subscriber, thank you so much for your subscription and welcome to the Luminousz family. How does these relationships become affected? Well, the narcissistic codependent relationship. First of all, I want to point out that there are two components that we're dealing with here, and that is codependency and narcissism. Okay, well, actually pathological narcissism. So when we're dealing with these two dynamics in relationships, first of all, it can actually influence us to look at some harsh realities, not just about ourselves, but about other people. So the effects of trauma within a narcissistic codependent relationship can be quite dire. Sometimes it can feel heavy on the spirit and the heart. Sometimes it even makes us feel hopeless. But I know sometimes in the past when I was dealing with relationships that are not healthy for me, yeah, there were times that I felt depressed. There were times that I felt hopeless. Now, codependent narcissistic relationships or narcissistic codependent relationships, whichever way you like to put it, is the same thing, right? So when we're dealing with this, it can actually influence us to dig deep into our own shadow. So we're already dealing with cluster personality types such as histrionic personality, antisocial personality, narcissistic personality, and the histrionic. I mentioned histrionic. I meant borderline personality, right? So what are the 4 ways that trauma can show up in narcissistic codependent relationships? It can be psychologically, okay? It can also be generational, or what you call transgenerational trauma. This is when our parents and our grandparents have suffered something in their past that left them traumatized, but they passed that on to the offspring. Okay, so I read something about this can actually alter the child's DNA. Very fascinating. So I want everybody to read up on, if you would, in your own time, just look up transgenerational or intergenerational trauma. All right, let's look at the narcissism key. Healthy, unhealthy, and pathological narcissism. Let's go over to the far left. Healthy narcissism, stable narcissism, destructive narcissism, and over to the far right, pathological narcissism. Now you will find 2 subheadings: normal narcissism, clinical narcissism. Now let's go right back over to the healthy narcissism. Age-appropriate narcissism, cohesive, integrated self. Now these are your adaptive, flexible traits of narcissism. On over to the next column, stable narcissism. Under that, normal narcissism, extraordinary narcissism, productive narcissism, codependency, co-narcissism. These are your semi-flexible traits of narcissism. On over to the next column, destructive narcissism, destructive narcissistic pattern, unproductive narcissism. These are your semi-rigid traits. This is when narcissists usually have the sense of entitlement. Last column, over to the furthest right, pathological narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, personality disorders, cluster B disorders. Now you can find these featured as a diagnostic criterion in the DSM-5. Subheading up under cluster B disorders,
malignant narcissism, antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, and rigid personality traits. Now, narcissists at this stage, they tend to exploit others. All right. So in some of my videos, some of you have heard of me speaking of how a narcissist will exploit your ability or capacity to express emotions. Neurolinguistic programming. Neuro are the thoughts. The programming are the behaviors. Linguistic are the words. The triune brain, mammal, reptile, and rational. The various states of the brain, which are the executive, emotional, and survival. All right, so the survival often asks, am I safe? Emotional often asks, am I loved? Where the executive asks, what can I learn?
Who is possibly selected unconsciously to act as a scapegoat in order to serve the interests of their dysfunctional family. Next point. The personality structure of the narcissistic parents and or grandparents are usually the most invalidating to the child who has been selected to play the dysfunctional role of scapegoat. It might not be surprising that these personality structures often clash. Sometimes the child who is selected by the narcissistic parents and or grandparents to be scapegoat, sometimes they're more gifted, if not talented, than the narcissistic parents and or grandparents. Sometimes they're more intuitive, but there's something about the child that really makes him or her stand out from the narcissistic parents and or grandparents. Usually, whatever it is about the child that stands out to the narcissistic parents and or grandparents is deemed as a threat to their false self-images. Let's move forward. The scapegoated child has a personality structure that his or her narcissistic parents find the most challenging to their false self-images. The identified patient, or IP, child is blamed by their narcissistic parents, grandparents, and siblings for any and all family challenges. So anything that the narcissistic parents and or grandparents finds disturbing or unsettling about the family, the child is usually blamed for it. Pardon me, the IP child is usually blamed. And to make matters worse, the narcissistic parents and or grandparents groom their siblings to join in on the blame game. It can be generations of alcoholics, generations of drug users, gamblers, whatever it is that makes the family dysfunctional. Unfortunately, the IP child is blamed for it all. Another way trauma shows up is biochemical, or is biochemical addiction. I've done a few videos about that. Please, at the end of this video, check out that video about biochemical addiction. Neurological, okay? This is where sometimes the neurological what is called Neurolinguistic Programming comes in, where the person is gaslighting us, so that's going to affect our perspective. It's going to make us question, okay, who we are, where do we stand in the relationship. Because when a person uses gaslighting techniques via neurolinguistic programming, that makes you feel like you're in a twilight zone, because your head and your heart or your emotions are being toyed with seemingly all the time. So when we're talking about how our mental and emotional health is affected in these relationships, this is pretty deep, because sometimes this can make us look at the world in a very dark way. Some of us have known someone to, unfortunately, start to harm themselves, maybe even other people. Some people have suicidal tendencies. Okay, some people, they may have maladaptive coping mechanisms, such as cutting themselves. Some of us, when we slip into that very dark place, we may start to do things that maybe we never thought we would do. Okay, and again, this is coming from pain. Some people are just, they slip into that dark side. We all have a dark side. Now, I'm not advocating to just, go full throttle with that. My point is, when we are affected by codependent narcissistic relationships, it's not just affecting us, it affects those around us. When people are constantly put down and let down, especially by loved ones such as family, this again can influence a person to tap into the dark side or to slope psychologically. Okay, they can just go to a dark place. And this is very dangerous. So when a person is suffering trauma, this is very deep. So when we start looking at narcissistic codependent relationships, it's very easy to miss the signs of trauma.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the cluster B personality types: borderline, histrionic, antisocial, and narcissistic. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up the cluster B personality types is because when we start to call people narcissists, and I certainly hope I don't sound like I'm judging, because I'm not. The point that I'm making is sometimes when we're dealing with loved ones, families, friends, even co-workers, or anyone in life, and we label them a narcissist, I say it's best to know exactly who we're calling a narcissist. Okay, who are we calling a narcissist? Who are we talking to? What are we talking about, right? So beware of diagnosing others who may seem very different, to deal with. They may seem very different, or they may seem very difficult to deal with, right? Because a lot of us, we can think of people right now that may show signs of having a narcissistic trait or two. But the reason why I'm pointing out the cluster B personality types is, as you can see here, we have 3 that are not narcissistic. We have borderline, histrionic, and antisocial. So every cluster B personality type is not a narcissist. But every narcissistic person that you may meet, or a person who has a narcissistic personality disorder, they do have a cluster B personality type. Okay, so I just want to point that out because I know a lot of us sometimes when we have relationships, I've done this too, people who are very difficult to get along with, we may want to label them a narcissist, but it's very, we want to be very careful about this. I just want to suggest being careful, because sometimes the person that's giving you a lot of hardship and grief, they are not necessarily a narcissist. And not only that, they may not necessarily have narcissistic traits that are over the top. See, relationships are designed to promote personal growth, and it's also designed to resolve childhood issues or trauma. But relationships are also designed to connect with others who face these same challenges. The other thing I found out was that some people who have a cluster B personality type, some of them have been mislabeling others as narcissists. The main thing that I'm concerned about is people misdiagnosing other people, or actually just diagnosing them and mislabeling him or her to be a narcissist when maybe they're not dealing with a narcissist at all. When we start getting in our feelings and when we start becoming fearful, one of the things that happens, and I'm not judging because I've done this too, we become blind to how we can thrive forward because it reduces visibility. I remember times that I was very angry about dealing with certain people who were very difficult to deal with. And yes, I am guilty for mislabeling some of those individuals. This is why I'm bringing this up. And what I found was that was one of the things that was holding me back from progressing, from driving forward. Okay, so the aftermath of narcissistic codependent relationships can be painful memories, nightmares, flashbacks, childhood trauma, addiction, and unresolved inner wounds. Okay, so this is where we're really talking about the dark night of the soul. This is what it really looks like. We're dealing with all of these things, and sometimes it can cause certain emotions such as sadness. It can cause anger. And then when we start getting in our egos, and then on top of that we're fearful, then yeah, sometimes this can cause individuals to mislabel people that may be difficult to deal with. Again, he or she may not be a narcissist, but this does not mean that they don't have a cluster B personality type, such as being histrionic, antisocial, or having a borderline personality. Some of these individuals that may be giving us some grief, they haven't been diagnosed necessarily. Okay, and some of them have, but of course they're not going to let that be known. But regardless, we just want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves when we are in the dark night of the soul. You have to really practice mindfulness at this time. Emotional discipline is going to be your best friend. Okay, so there are some cluster B personality types that really don't care about resolving issues. They don't care about making sure the relationship is healthy. They don't care about what they're bringing to the table. They don't care about if they have misconduct, okay, how they show up in the relationship, and even how they leave it. They don't care about that. So when you are right smack in the middle of the dark night of the soul, this is imperative that you take care of yourself. Have a support base, because a narcissist and a cluster B personality type, they're not going to care about your surviving narcissistic codependent relationships. When you start to thrive, that's when they may sit up and take a look, and they may try to throw a monkey wrench or two into your support base. They may even recruit flying monkeys at this point to hoover you back in. So a history of broken hearts, disappointments, betrayal, sabotage, deception, manipulation, and ghosting does not necessarily spell out narcissism. Because I just really wanted to take that point home, because I know sometimes when people are in the dark night of the soul, some people who are not narcissists necessarily, they may be difficult to deal with, and it can trigger those inner childhood wounds. It can trigger childhood trauma. And some cluster B personality types, they have also suffered childhood trauma, and some of them have not. Some of them are just bullies. Okay, so their issues may stem from something else. Regardless, mistreatment from another human being is not tolerated. It ought not to be tolerated. One of the things that I found out on my journey is that when we start to really take care of ourselves and we have a better view of ourselves, we start to feel confident about making decisions in life, we start grabbing the bull by the horns, right, and really start living our best lives. This is one of the things that naturally comes to us, and that is not to tolerate any mistreatment, whether it's narcissistic or codependent or otherwise. Question: how does your narcissist behavior reflect the diagnosis of narcissistic personality or cluster B personality in the DSM-5? Next critical question: are any of your relationships in alignment with the purpose of your existence? How does your narcissist behavior reflect the diagnosis of narcissistic personality or cluster B personality in the DSM-5? Now that goes back to one of the points that I made earlier of how sometimes we may be mislabeling certain people who are difficult to deal with as narcissists, when actually they're not narcissists at all. This is what I've learned, so I'm just sharing. The thing to keep in mind, especially when you're in the dark night of the soul, is that some people who are difficult to deal with, who may be triggering your childhood traumas, are not necessarily narcissists. Okay, so every cluster B personality type that you meet is not a narcissist, whereas every narcissistic personality type that you meet does have a cluster B personality type. Tools. First tool, research cluster B personality types. Tool number 2, practice mindfulness with an open heart. Tool number 3, release energy that seems heavy and wasted. Okay, so tool number 2, practice mindfulness with an open heart. What does that mean? That means especially when you're right in the middle of the dark night of a soul, and you're going through all of these emotions and just seem like nothing in life turns out for you. You want to practice mindfulness with an open heart, because you're taking care of yourself. That's what it looks like. So when you're practicing mindfulness with an open heart, this means that you're open to receiving your dreams coming true. You're open to receiving all types of good, whether it's in the form of people, places, and things. When we have a contrast, that means we're not seeing narcissists everywhere. Okay, we're not seeing cluster B personality types everywhere. Because the contrast provides three things. It provides a peace of mind, harmony, and balance. So that way, when we're in the dark night of the soul, we can have some peace. We can have some pleasant moments. It's not all doom and gloom. Because I can tell you from experience, when you go through the dark night of the soul, it just is not always, it's not always pleasant. But you want to have those intermissions of peace of mind. You want to have those intermissions of harmony, of balance. In other words, you want to have a break from the pain. Okay? Because even when we're in the dark night of the soul, even though it's not very pleasant to go through, you can still have those moments to take time out to smell the roses.
Please check the description box below for resources. I have a whole list of resources there that may be able to help you out. If you are, or someone that you know is in that situation. Okay, so I don't want anyone to think that they're alone. When some cluster B personality types, such as narcissists, begin to toy with a person's mind, and they toy with their emotions, the person who is targeted, he or she, whether it's a child or an adult, what he or she tends to do is they try to make sense of the crazy making. So again, this is how a person can be psychologically affected by having a codependent narcissistic relationship, especially for a long period of time. Gaslighting technique is a byproduct of the Neurolinguistic Programming, okay, because they're toying with the head. It's a mind game. So when the person who's targeted tries to figure the crazy making out, they can start to feel like they're having a break with reality. So this is where psychosis or neurosis can come in.